on today's StoryBeat.
So using improv in that moment, I was able to discover my own story that I had and I felt I needed to tell.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Samuel A. Simon, started his career in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer for Ralph Nader's first advocacy group, becoming a part of the infamous Nader's Raiders. He then spent 25 years as the head of a public affairs firm. In that work, he was often in the news, appearing on Face the Nation, The Phil Donahue Show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, and many more. Sam subsequently became a playwright and calls his playwriting and theater work his fourth age. His first play, The Actual Dance, Love's Ultimate Journey Through Breast Cancer, was later turned into an award-winning memoir. In 2021, Sam was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Despite the enormous challenges of this diagnosis, Sam has become Dementia Man, a powerful advocate through theater, using his own experience as an inspiration to reshape the narrative surrounding cognitive decline. In his newest play, Dementia Man, An Existential Journey, Sam defies stereotypes and inspires audiences. Just be aware, please, that today Sam is being joined by his wife, Susan, who acts as his cognitive navigator. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a true honor for me to welcome the extraordinary advocate, playwright, and actor, Sam Simon, to StoryBeat today. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I love my introduction. I didn't realize all that about me. No, I'm just teasing.
You're bigger than you know.
Working on it.
So let's go back in time just a little bit. Which came first for you, your interest in law, advocacy, or the theater?
Well, that's a great question, because the truth is that I did community theater first. So that's interesting. I hadn't taught it quite, in time sequence before. I was in the high school play. Play was I Remember Mama, I was Papa.
I was in I Remember Mama at USC when I was in school there.
There we go.
I played little Peter Thorkelson.
So I really enjoyed community theater. I was never formally trained in acting or theater. It attracted me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a latent interest. The other part of me was, I call it in my work, troublemaking. I almost think it's genetic. I mean, even as a teenager back in the, 50s, I was listening to talk radio, and I was getting angry at things. And in my work in this most recent play, I talk about at 14 going down to the city council of El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
I had to take the bus. I didn't tell my parents. I had done, quote, research to find out that the 11 p.m. curfew for kids 17 and under, Nelson Rockefeller thought they were unconstitutional, and I was angry. And funny thing is, I just wanted to go do it. I didn't realize that the next morning, my rant was headlines in the morning newspaper. And my parents found out about it that way. But, and even the Nader, the choice to go to work for Nader and other things I've done in my life, I have this, like I said, almost genetic urge to work for justice.
But at the same time, you've also had a career in which you were out front.
Yeah.
You're not a behind the scenes lawyer. You actually got out in front of people.
Absolutely. I laugh about some of it. I'm in a brand new field. I never was a figure in the medical / memory. There's a whole world out there. You look at any career or any agency of some sort, and you'll see they're behind that person or thing you meet There's a trade association. There's a whole world out there. So I changed my focus once before in life, and I learned, and I think Ralph Nader helped me understand this.
Well, let's talk about some of that. How did you choose to become a lawyer in the first place? Why law?
It was actually the choice of last resort. I did not know what I wanted to be. Seriously, it was, what else can I do? I didn't. My dad was a traveling salesman. Think Willie Loman. I mean, people don't remember that in the 40s and 50s, people took out the back seat of a car, filled it with suitcases filled with children and infants wear, samples, drive from little store to little store.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they ordered wholesale.
And you didn't want to do that, I'm guessing.
No, and it wasn't. And then my mom, both passed many, many years ago, but she had been a flamenco dancer as a young woman. And
so performance is in your genes.
Maybe that's where I came from. I hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe it's from my mom's side, because she was a flamenco. I still have her flamenco. The castanets. And, she ended up becoming, as most women did, and a typist.
So eventually you go off and you become a lawyer. How in the world did you hook up with Ralph Nader, of all people?
My parents wanted me to be like my brother-in-law, who retired, by the way, as a 2-star general.
Ooh.
But he had married my second oldest sister when she was 18. He was West Point. It was safety. They were a bit of the Depression era. Go into the government or the military and make it a career. You'll get this great. They wanted that for me. And I went to ROTC, and it wasn't that far off. But this genetic anger or sense of justice was building in the Vietnam War. I had already had my military obligation when the anti-war stuff was building up. And so the lawyer part of it, I had to fight to get to go to law school instead of immediately to Vietnam, and I won. It's a long story behind that. It was all appealed to the Pentagon to give me an exception.
What year was this, Sam?
This was going to be 67.
67. So right in the middle of the Vietnam War.
And they had told me I'd gotten a scholarship. The ROTC started giving scholarships to ROTC, full scholarships. And before I took my scholarship, I said, "Now I want to go to graduate school. This won't stop that, right?" And they call him professor of military science. This guy said, "Absolutely, here, it's in writing." I did it. And then they changed their mind. And you talk about I've had some moments in life where, like, I'm sure we all have in some ways, where my PMS calls me, he says, "I need to talk to you, come in." He go in the office, he closes the door. "I'm going to show you a classified document." Well, it says for official use only, but that counted as classified to him. But he said, "We have decided that all scholarship students must go on active duty immediately upon graduation." And I was assigned the infantry in 1967. I am sure, had I gone right out to the Army, to the infantry corps, I would have been sent to Vietnam and killed. I have no doubt about it.
Probably stood a pretty good chance of it, that's for sure.
And, here's a person I don't remember his name, felt bad enough, says, "I'm going to prosecute an appeal because I know that we promised you and you relied on that." And this was August of 1967. And in 3 weeks, I was either going to go to Fort Benning or to Austin. And I still remember the phone call. The Assistant Secretary of the Army for whatever has agreed to allow you to go to law school as an exception to standing policy. I can still remember holding the phone.
How lucky are you?
Yeah, well, I'm alive because of that phone call.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate.
So my energy around both the Vietnam War, my best friend at the time, still a very close friend, was very anti-war. I saw him demonstrate and people try to beat him up as a result of it. And they were handing out literature one day and I felt a mob come behind me and flipped at their tape. So part of that built in me this sense of, I model my best friend. And I think that helped build the energy. So when I ended up in law school, it seemed logical. I had an aunt, my mother's oldest sister, Lena Altman, the 16th woman lawyer in Florida ever,
Wow.
one of the first women lawyers in Louisiana, and one of the first female lawyers who was admitted to the federal bar in Florida. So I had a model there. She worked in El Paso, notwithstanding that she was admitted to the bar as a legal secretary, but still.
So how do you then get to Ralph Nader?
So we're in law school, and it's the anti-war, and I'm in Austin, not known as a ultra liberal. Although at the time, Johnson was president. He was from Texas. John Connally was a Democrat at the time. Ralph Nader. So we had that. There was a small group of us, and actually there was almost history here, in my point of view. And we were progressive. We were inherently liberal. We done well. We were in law review. One of them was a fellow by the name of Joe Tom Easley. Joe Tom was a year behind us, but older than us, and he became a Nader's Raider. For one summer, he went up to Washington to work for Ralph Nader. So Nader's Raiders did studies of federal agencies and wrote these big reports. People from the era may remember them. They did studies of all the agencies.
I'm old enough to remember.
And Joe Tom came back. He and Ralph eventually became very close friends. And Joe Tom recommended 3 others of us to work for Ralph. Now, I had a problem. I'm going to graduate. Ralph Nader wants to hire me. The Army wants me in the JAG Corps after I graduate.
Okay.
Well, by 1970, the war is winding down. I called the Department of Army, say, can I get an extension? Because the first public interest research group, the first Nader group, law firm, you got a contract for a year. They said, yeah, fine. Come when you want to come. So I had a sister living in, my oldest sister was a model for me. The late Marion Simon Garmel. She graduated University of Texas undergraduate in journalism. She went to work for the National Student Association, NSA, which was in her era. She's 9 years older than me. Would have been 9 years older than me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was the activist student group. They were accused of being communist in their day, and she worked in Washington, and so I was catching some of that energy from my oldest sister, Marion.
But in the meantime, your advocacy as a child and then advocacy through college and so on, that leads you naturally into a situation like a Nader's Raiders.
Yeah, well, I think yesterday or today is the 50th anniversary of Kent State. But Kent State happened while we were in law school. And one of our professors and the 3 of us who went up to work for Ralph, and there was going to be a march in Austin. And there was fear, and the city council would not issue a parade permit. And there was this fear that it would be violence on the streets. And we stayed up all night and drafted a writ of mandamus, which was filed in the morning with the federal court to order the parade permit to be issued, to avoid another Kent State. And it was granted. So we had this example of taking a stand and doing something and using the law. And we said, I am convinced we saved lives.
You probably did.
That it would have just been something else. And so that kind of energy, I loved it. I mean, because we'd stayed up all night. I'm walking home from having done all that. Must have been 9 a.m. or so, been up all night. And I look down the street and I can see literally thousands of people had been on either side. I say thousands, what it felt like, on either side of the street trying to stay on the sidewalks. And the writ of mandamus was granted, and I could see them breaking out into the middle of the street. And you talk about satisfaction for something it feels to me almost genetic. And this just helped bring that out.
All right. So then my question, because this show concentrates on creative process, how much do you think your work with Ralph Nader and then later in public affairs and your advocacy position has influenced what you've done with Dementia Man? Is that where it comes from, that advocacy, from that deep-seated experience that you had?
Yes, at a different time, and let me tell you about that. So I had a career in Washington. I still did community theater here in the DC area.
Oh, you were doing community theater all along?
All long pieces of it.
Acting or something else?
Acting, that moved me to improv. So there was a theater group in New York called Artistic New Directions. It's still there. And they're primarily improvisational theater, not comedic, but theatrical improvisation. And I've been in a local show here, and somebody says, there's a group over here that I think you might like. They're doing some improv. You might like that. I don't know why the fellow actor said that. And I signed up for the class. And that maybe in some ways it was the beginning of everything. Improv changed my life.
How so?
It taught me how to be a human being. It taught me yes-anding life. If anybody listening wants it, do theatrical improv, take improv classes, learning how to practice in real time, accepting all information given, adding to it. I mean, that includes listening, and that includes avoiding the word no and but.
Well, the infamous improv cliche is that it's yes and.
And I learned doing that in some of my day-to-day work. I was so lucky. I mean, I'm fortunate you fall into these things. So Artistic New Directions had summer camps. I'm running a public affairs company that I'm the boss of, so I can take whatever time off I want to go to these camps. And my teachers, you may know some. I don't know if you knew Gary Austin or knew of Gary Austin.
I know the name.
He had founded the Groundlings in LA, and he was one of my teachers. And then there was some folks from Second City, and I learned so much. Sometimes, by the way, it's tough learning. I don't know. You have some tough teachers, but Gary once told me I didn't know what I was doing out loud in front of everybody. So, but I want to go back to your other question. So I was having that theatrical training, the improv training. At the same time, I was about 65, and a friend of mine, long story, we don't have to tell it all, but a minister had worked with me in media reform with some of my Nader work, had breakfast with me and told me that he had been hired to run a social justice ministry in New York, the Collegiate Church of New York, the oldest church in America. Was setting up a social justice ministry. I was leaving my company and looking for something new to do, and I was going to these summer things, and A&D's in New York, and we had breakfast, and he tells me the church gave him a 10-year contract and $20 million over the 10 years to change the world. And I said, can I come up and help?
Wow.
So I would go up every other week. We live in the Washington area. Every other week, I'd go spend 5 days in New York as a senior fellow to that. It was Bob, his name is the Reverend Robert Chase. He's a great guy, he's still around. We're still good friends. But the team he put together to get social justice included musicians and actors. Although I was one of the stronger voices in that group to focus more on that side of things. And it was just a unique opportunity. I mean, right after I started, there was this tremendous immigration crisis in the Middle East. He was sending 3 young people to Syria and Iraq and the like to write a report. I said, write a report? I don't know why. It was send a playwright, send a dance company, send musicians. How do you really change hearts? And I learned it in this real time moment. I believe that if you really want to change a person, a decision maker, you need to change their heart. they've seen thousands of policy papers. And the odds of, they're going to write this paper and people would read it. Instead, they had this dance company and they had this full theatrical presentation. That kind of work can really put people in a position they want to do something different.
How do you go about changing someone's heart? What do you do?
You give them the emotional energy and urgency. It's an ability to see the world differently and to understand the urgency of it. Often authentic voices, but if you write a play that is based on what really happened and it's emotional and you see people die from what's going on, and it's opposed to 15 paragraphs on one page, and also I think music does that. And, it led me. So I was now every other week in New York. So now the A&D theater company that I was part of, I get to go every Wednesday night that I'm there twice a month to classes and create work. And so my wife, Susan, now my cognitive navigator, in 2000 had been diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. And I was a caregiver. And there was a moment in that journey where the doctors pulled me over and said, get ready. We don't think she's going to make it. Now, it took me 9 years to realize that I had what I called post-traumatic spiritual disorder. And because of my work with Gary and this improv group, I had never written a play before. But there was an exercise Gary had where he had like 4 people in class and say, each of you have to talk for 20 minutes, go. One at a time. Try it one day. Try to talk 20 minutes without stopping. And in that exercise, I started talking about what had happened with Susan and me and my experience. And to find somebody who was actually a character in the play that I eventually wrote. So using improv, and in that moment, I was able to discover my own story that I had and I felt I needed to tell.
But it's interesting, you had already been doing something like that before in improv and so on. It wasn't a completely new experience for you.
Right. It was, it's latent. It's latent. It is. God, we could talk forever about various things, but maybe even since grade school or high school, I was really an actor at heart.
I'm going to say it the way that I would say it to my friends, which is you've always been a ham.
Well, that too. But that's true too. You boom, you got it right away. I'm the guy who raises his hand or stands up without raising his hand. I've always been.
You have an outgoing personality and you don't have any fear of standing up in front of people, which would, by the way, make you a very good advocate in court as well.
Yeah, and you learn that a little bit. So I don't want to, I'm going to turn 80.
That's awesome.
We're condensing a lifetime. But I was taught that actually the Nader folks were really, in one way. So I was going from, I was changing the field. I was going into media reform, telecommunications. And I was, they're about to defund public TV. They want to defund public TV. I had gotten into a safe government job, just like my parents wanted me to. And I was working at the Federal Trade Commission and on the Hill for a while. And Ralph Nader comes up to me, calls me again. He's still a friend at 92, by the way.
Wow.
And he says, there's an opportunity, Sam. There's an organization called the National Citizens Committee for Broadcasting. It was being run by a fellow by the name of Nicholas Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick's going to leave. And I don't want it to go under, will you leave your GS-15 job and go take over the National Citizens Committee for Broadcasting? I'll be on your board. We can pay you $20,000 a year. And I was making the 80. And they had 10,000 in the bank. But by the way, the NCCB originally was a elite committee, included Walter Cronkite, that lobbied Congress to enact the creation of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And they had succeeded. And they had gotten Congress back then to create an effective public broadcasting system and the mechanism to fund it. And I took over for a while that committee,
Wow.
the remnants of that committee, because it had ended and Cronkite, a lot of the big names fell off of it. And I eventually changed it because this was the emerging new technology area. We called it the Telecommunications Research and Action Center track. But I was in New York and I was being able to go to my theater group and continue to learn and experience theater as a theatrical improv. And improv, you have to be willing. You talk about loud, or you have to learn how to drop the constraints.
And it enables you to think clearly on your feet.
Accept all information given and add to it.
So let's talk for a bit about your current theatrical experiences. You would not know this, but my mother, who's no longer with us, but she lived for 4.5 years with Alzheimer's. But I can tell you there's no way that she could have done what you're doing, because once she went into that diagnosis, she was very far down the road.
Yeah.
And so do you think that working with your brain as a playwright and as a performer and so on has helped to slow the progression of the disease in some way because you're using your mind a lot?
I don't want to give the reason. I want to acknowledge the truth that everybody, my care team, my doctors, my neurologists, believe that it is true that my work and my passion has helped moderate the rate of decline. And I'm early stage. And I'm here in part because I have a genetic risk. There's a gene. I urge everybody to find out if they have it, if they've seen it in the family, called APOE4. So I had the genetic risk. I was complaining bitterly about certain incidences to my internist, who thought I was just a overeducated man overreacting to normal aging. And then I had some symptoms he couldn't explain and sent me to a neurologist. But so, yeah, doing this work, being engaged, has definitely had a positive impact on my slowing the disease progression.
Because so many people, and I know some myself, so many people, as they get into their 60s and start to think about retiring, they turn their brains off. They stop reading, they stop thinking, they stop writing, they stop doing things that are mental exercises. You've clearly continued on with it. And I would like to think that that's helped you.
That seems to be the case. My progression is, well, it's important to know, my early diagnosis is critical, because once I got the formal diagnosis, and just so everybody knows, they don't listen to this, say, oh, you can't have it. I have 3 confirming opinions. They've done the test of the PET scans with contrast to my brain. I am amyloid positive. I do have it. And so I had both the risk at night. And I'm trying to remember the point I was trying to make here so dramatically. Okay. What happened, though, so I had already been doing theater. And I was having memory incidents. And there was some distinct symptoms that were, scary. And so I was getting diagnosed. I don't know if you know, you may be familiar with APAP. I started going as a solo artist to APAP in 2013 or 2014. Solo artists don't go to APAP, but I did. And I'd been going for a number of years. And my fellow artists, when I began to tell them that I had a mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's, they said, write about it, put it on page and on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it wasn't my first thought. And I've since learned so much from performing it.
Well, we're going to talk about that. I'm just curious, what are the challenges that you went through with cognitive issues as you were trying to write? Could you remember what you were writing, or did you have to constantly go back and refer to it? How does that work? Well,
a couple of things. I was performing my prior play as I was developing this.
Right.
We had a COVID plague, what do you call it? A pandemic.
Yes, we did have a pandemic.
So I was actually performing the actual dance over Zoom from my basement. Coincidence? I began to become unable to remember the line.
You were doing it out of memory. You had memorized it.
I had it completely memorized.
I see.
Susan was off to the side because we were at home, because she wasn't always traveling with me. It wasn't in all my other performances. But she was off to the side, couldn't be seen. And as I started to have problems, she could cue me. And that may have even hidden the severity for a while. So it was a combination of the encouragement of my theatrical group and having had the experience of seeing the power of theater. I can't tell you how, I call it, I actually think there should be a name, maybe you know it, existential theater, life and death.
There is existential theater.
And it is about the meaning of life and the end of things, at the core of it. And discovering it. I'm so privileged to be able to do that. And okay, so the writing process, I might not be able to remember where I am sometimes, or where my keys are, or certainly names, but I didn't have trouble remembering writing. I'm typing, speed typist.
So this is an interesting point for me. Do you think the act of writing helps to drum it into your head?
Well, I can't memorize it anymore.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying that you're saying you forgot what you were writing less than perhaps where your keys were. So I know for a fact, for me, that if I write something by hand onto a piece of paper, I have a tendency to be able to recall it more easily than if I am typing it, so that the act of writing itself actually does something.
Yeah, you have to know I'm dysgraphic and was partially dysgraphic as a kid. I had poor handwriting. I am now dysgraphic. I'm a speed typist.
You're a speed typist.
So is my mother. I typed papers in law school for others and made money. So I type, and I've always done it. I've done it well.
And that hasn't gone away.
No, and the writing was not what to say and how to say it was. And so I'm very fortunate. I couldn't spell dramaturg, much less know what it was, until I had one for the actual dance. When I said I need to write a play about this experience, I went back to the woman. Her name's Gabrielle Meisels, and she is my dramaturg for this. And the process of writing, is not only do you put it down, but playing it and writing. I think it's a creative process because I love that I learned from even doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me new ideas. I get ideas from the audience reaction. The best time of writing is when you have the test audiences, right?
Of course.
The early groups. I mean, the whole first 10, 12 minutes of this Dementia Man didn't exist until we got feedback from a group of people.
You need those early audiences and that feedback and beta readers and all those kinds of things that are very helpful.
Yeah, and I was not a professional. I was learning.
Well, you know what the difference is between an amateur and a professional?
The professional thinks I know everything.
No, the professional gets paid.
Mm.
That's the only difference. A professional is somebody who keeps at it, makes a living at it, and all the rest of it. But there are many very, very fine amateurs in the world that don't get paid. They just do it because they love it. And
I love the impact. I couldn't imagine this. I couldn't predict it. I was doing it for myself. In both instances, look, if you're about to hold the person you love most in the world as they take their last breath, that is an existential moment.
Absolutely.
I had to come to, now Susan is an unlikely survivor, but the doctors were sure. They discovered a post-double mastectomy lump, and boom, everybody goes dark. And I had to imagine that. I was told by one of the most, the head of psychiatry at Sloan Kettering, oncological psychiatry, that I'll never know what it'd be like to have lost her, because I didn't. but man, anticipatory grief coming right up to the edge. So it gives you those experiences. But I doing it theatrically through art and theater, telling a story.
Is that the power of theater? Is that you're a storyteller?
I think it's part of it. Well, yes, telling it in a way, and particularly universal stories. There are people who see their own journey differently, as you'll be able to tell your own story. And I learned mine differently. I learned from some of the audiences telling, but I didn't know that this was happening.
What do you think you learned about yourself in the act of writing and then performing this play? What do you think you learned that you maybe didn't know until you started to write it?
I learned how to put words to feelings and experiences. So my first one, the actual dance, I'm going to steal my 22-year-old granddaughter's phrase for me. Grandpa is about to go deep. I learned what love really means. That was one that I learned what love really means.
That's a big deal.
And I didn't understand it until I was able and had to retell. And so when it's autobiographical, you don't just retell the lines, you re-experience the moments. And I learned from doing the play that the ultimate act of love is being able to hold someone as they take their last breath, and that it is an infinite gift to both sides of that process. Now, I'll repeat what this psychiatrist told me, but Sam, you didn't do it. She survived. So you can't really know. I know that. I know that love, that, in the play, I said we became a singularity. We became one person, one soul.
And you learned that in the act of writing.
In the act of writing and performing. I've written books, and I don't know that it's the same thing. The audience interaction in this type of work is its own gift.
One of the things that I noticed, because I watched the video of Dementia Man, so I saw your performance on video, and what I noticed from the writing of it and then the performance as well is that despite all these things, you have not lost your sense of humor, and you have not lost your sense of intelligence. That hasn't gone away. And so how important do you think it is for a creative person to retain those two very vital things?
But you're asking me to be almost an academic who has a book and knows is writing the story of it.
Well, tell us what you feel about it.
I find it happens. It's experiential. Okay, you have to understand, there are pieces of this that I'm doing something where I'm crossing my hands here, where Susan and I have switched positions. And this is not a small thing. I was a care partner, I call it love partner, to someone who had we thought, a terminal diagnosis. I am now the person with the terminal diagnosis, and she has the responsibility or opportunity, however you want to do it. So there's an emotional overlay to what is happening. But I also believe, and there's the guy who wrote the book who said this, name's escaping me, where you go on stage, you have to, all values to those who walk on stage. What's his name? You don't have to go to theater school. You just go on.
You're not talking about David Mamet, are you?
Yes, I am.
How about that? I plucked that one right out of the atmosphere somewhere.
Yes, Mamet. Yes, and it's a form of improv. I go back to the value of improv because it lets you do that. You are authentic to the moment, and it changes you. It changed me, the actor, and it changes the audience. And it's about the most important things in life. That thing. And, it affects how we live every day, the story itself. So we integrated into, I did community theater, actually more than I thought now that I'm thinking about it. And, memorizing lines and being somebody else is different than when it's your story.
Well, that's for sure, because you're telling your story. You're not telling someone else's story in character. And what I do notice from watching the video again is that you were carrying the play with you, but you had a huge amount of it memorized, and you didn't really refer to it all that often. You weren't reading it. You were just using that paper as a memorization crutch.
Yeah.
And I think that that's perfectly fine and acceptable for what you're doing. But you had a huge amount of it in your head already.
It didn't feel that much. It still doesn't. I look at videos of that. There's every show, and I feel like I have my eyes down all the time. But maybe that's just the self-critic in me.
Oh, I didn't see it that way. I mean, you obviously referred to the paper here and there, but I didn't see it as anything more than you getting out and talking to people eye to eye, which is in this case what you're doing as a solo performer.
And there's no doubt that as I performed, I became more and more comfortable. Again, Susan will tell you that, and that I did begin. I don't know exactly which performance, the fifth, I don't know, or 15th, but I started to improvise to the audience as moments.
It messed me up.
However, she said
you messed up your cognitive navigator. Is what you were doing
on the front row with the script.
You could see that in the video. You could see that Susan's sitting there.
And look, there have been times where I lose orientation. She can pull me back. I don't know if there have been big moments. They're usually fairly short, but they're clearly moments I need.
Well, I think the beauty of it is that the audience knows what's going on, and so nobody's thrown by that. Nobody's sitting in the audience going, "Why is that? Why is he referring to someone else?
Right.
Why is he referring to the paper?" No, they know why.
Ultimately, it could have been scripted that way. A play about this.
Yes, it could. You could publish your play, and someone else could perform it who has no cognitive issues.
Yes. You
did that with the actual dance.
Well, in the actual dance, it wasn't because of cognition, but this goes to the nature of existential theater. They're so intimate topics. I was performing the actual dance, and I'm a white Jewish guy, and there's pieces in that play about our synagogue and the like. But I performed once in a primarily almost all African American audience. It became clear, and Susan pushed me on this most, that we should have somebody who looked like the audience doing the show. It's not that you couldn't project yourself into somebody of a different race necessarily, but when you're talking about such an intimate experience, you include culture in that. So he's a friend, and he and a professional actor, and he African American Chuck Gobasi, who performed as well for me, and it wasn't exclusively one or the other, but it was we changed the script a bit.
Is that play published?
Yes, it's online.
Is Dementia Man going to be published?
Yes, the actual dance is available for licensing to local theaters
so there you go. And so eventually people will perform Dementia Man.
Yes.
Whether they have a condition like yours or not, they'll perform it as something, as an advocacy play that's very interesting to listen to.
Yes. And it is an advocacy piece.
For sure.
Because we argue for, among other things, getting rid of the word dementia, even though it's called Dementia Man. I've been beat up over that. We want cognitive navigators as available as curb cuts.
Mm-hmm.
And we also argue against the choice of accompanied suicide.
So I'm curious, as you perform, are you a nervous person when you're getting ready to perform? Do you have nerves, or are you pretty calm?
I'm pretty calm. I want to thank my breath teacher, Carol Fox Prescott, as well as Gabrielle also did some breath work. I'm a big believer in breath work.
Is that how you deal with pressure? Is by breath work?
Yes, and that's how I isolate and I work on my breath. I listen to my breath, I follow my breath, I empty my head and focus on breathing. I can be in a room and I can roll on the floor if I don't get dirty, or just make deep movements, but always the breath And I've been taught that it's not nose breathing, it's through the mouth. But that's what I do. But every performance, I have to get ready, I have to empty it. I'm not nervous, but I have to be present as that character. I'm the character, Sam Simon.
Yes, sure.
And I honor the profession, I think, in the process by doing that.
Is that your main set of preparations for performance? Is breath?
Yes.
That's remarkable. You don't go through stretching or any kind of physical.
Well, I don't separate the two because part of the breath work involves movement.
I see.
I could stand up here and show you, because you start here and you follow it and you bend and you can roll on the floor. In costume, you don't want to do that, but yes, it involves movement. But the movement is in service of getting out of the head.
Getting out of the head. That's the most important thing. Yeah. So that you can be what classically for actors is called being in the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Being in the moment, being present. And it took a long time to understand the concept of following the breath, but it's listening to the emotional part of yourself that's happening. It's not what line 12, or it's like, where I am, this is the moment, it's real.
Well, the nicest thing for you about doing this particular play is that it is your story. So if you do go off and wander in one direction or another, it's still your story.
It's the story for the audience sees. Yes, it is. It is my, and I don't want to give the most important thing is I learned that I can see and understand my own story differently.
Isn't that interesting? You can see it almost as an outsider looking in.
Yeah, and understand it can be shocking sometimes that it's like, oh, now I understand what was happening. And it's from both the performance and the audience interaction, or maybe somebody said, we always do a top feedback, which is different than big Broadway. We always do feedback after a performance, so we're best for intimate theaters because we think there's so much emotion built in for many in the audience, not because of the topic and because of the issues. And we do learn from that too.
Well, sure.
I'm just trying to remember. I wish I could pull it up, but I learned so much too from the audience and the discussions because they'll see the situation through their eyes or their experience.
Of course they will, and every audience will be a little bit different.
And then they'll express it, and I'll hear it, and I say, "That's right."
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been having just an absolutely fascinating conversation with Sam Simon and his cognitive navigator, Susan, who's been alongside for the ride. And we're going to wind the show down just a little bit now. And I'm wondering, in all of these experiences you've had, whether as an advocate or with Ralph Nader or in community theater or in doing your plays and writing them, can you give us a story perhaps that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or maybe just plain funny that has happened to you along the way?
Oh, well, I do want to say the ahas for me. And I think it happened with Dementia Man. And it was during a rehearsal with the small audience of people.
Right.
And it was finding somebody in the audience that had been through the same thing. And it doesn't sound that weird, but in the conversation, it's like, oh, so that's what happened to me. And I said it out loud. and it took a while to get everybody back together. But it's an encouragement, by the way, for I love actors and others to not be afraid to do that. And don't become so convinced of what we're doing that we can't learn.
You're saying don't get stuck in what it is.
And that can all of a sudden it can be just the opposite.
Yeah, for sure. It can be just the opposite. And a performer, I think, needs to know the play or what you're doing well enough that you can go in various emotional directions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. If I'm worried, if I'm too worried about, am I getting this right? Is that what I should have done? I can't hear even the internal. God, what was it one time too on the Dementia Man where it came out differently, and it's because it felt different at the moment, but I have enough confidence to do that.
Absolutely. You're very well prepared.
Yeah. And it happens because that in the moment is what's real.
That's what makes it beautiful to watch, is that in the moment it's really real or feels real, even if it isn't. But if the actor can get there, that makes it so special.
Yeah. I've fallen in, the other thing is I've fallen in love with this work.
And that's helpful, I would think.
I couldn't have imagined, even, Grandpa goes deep. But again, so during the actual dance, Susan and I the American University had their students, and they were doing a film on people who'd done some of this show. We were one of the couples that they were filming to show what community theater and what people show, theater of meaning was, at any rate. We were sitting next to each other. They had finished filming us, and one of the young ladies walks up to who had been there, and she looks around and making sure nobody's seeing her. And she came up to us and said, "You guys seem to be so in love. What's your secret?" And my first temptation is, "Yes, dear." Yeah. But there was something so serious about her. The young lady asking the question, felt like what was the answer? And I'll offer it because I think it's also, we said a sacred promise. And I do believe in that. But, we didn't walk into this moment thinking about that question, what the answer should be. It's in real time. What's the secret of your relationship? And for anybody out there, we'll be married 59 years in August.
Wow, good for you.
And hey, world, there were some up and down years.
I don't think there is such a thing as a 59-year marriage without a few up and down years.
So, but in real time, I love it. And that's what theater is, right? It's real time.
It is real time, and it's live, and it's very, very personal when you're watching it.
And then you get asked this question, and there's something. So we said a sacred promise that we promised, and I believe that we had a responsibility to make it work.
Well, I think that's really terrific, and good on you for getting through 59 years together. I mean, that's how many people can say that. So last question for you today, Sam. You've given us a huge amount of very interesting advice to chew on already, just in your explanations of things. But I'm wondering if there's a single solid piece of advice or a tip that perhaps people may ask you how you do it, what you tell someone who may be starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit trying to get to the next level.
The most important piece is don't stop. Don't give up. I told earlier that, so APAP, this big theater conference I went to, this big conference in New York, there are 5,000 people. There are all the big Broadway performances touring. Every big theater in the country goes to it. They meet the new talent that's out there, among other things. And I was advised, because look, I'm going there. I don't have an agent at the time. I'm this one guy by myself. I'm the typical, I have the best new work out there. They'll see me and everybody will book me. The advice I got then, and I still use it now, and said, you've got to come back over and over again. They have to know you're in a new profession, you're in this profession, you're reliable, and that you have something of value. So they have confidence, but most importantly, don't stop. You have to go over and over and over. Keep showing up, keep doing your work. Because I'm going to say this to most people, if you keep doing it, it will be great work. Nobody nobody really shows up one time and all of a sudden is fabulous. And I love the fact that there was one guy at APAP. So you have to know there are 5,000 people, the big companies. There's this little guy like a dot on the blackboard at best. And there was another very long time well-known magician and performer there, and he would sort of sneer at us and stuff. About my 5th year going to APAP, I walked past his booth and he comes out and says, "Hey, Sam, I'm hearing some really good stuff about your play." And it was like, I've been at it long enough. And I think that's good. Well, it can happen. Yeah, don't be discouraged too. And I don't know if I ever hit a time that I felt like I shouldn't be doing it. And I'm lucky because the biggest barrier, right, is resources. I've been very fortunate in that I got a couple of grants in New York from a couple of places that were unique to who I knew and where I was. But I didn't stop. And then I fundraised on my own. And there's a great group in New York called Fractured Atlas that is my fiscal sponsor. So there are donors who get tax deductions. So, a self-producing artist, not only am I one man, but I have to create my own business infrastructure. So you've got to fall in love with your work. That's the way to say it.
Well, that was a great big bunch of wonderful advice all in one batch there. And I think that that's very wise, very powerful stuff, because you for sure will not succeed if you give up. So you have to keep going. And that's the way that you get to where you're trying to go.
And the one that I thought I was going to say, and now just came back to me. So when I was starting on, I had a small team in New York. I never produced a play officially, but I now had a dramaturg, a director, and a group, and we were working together. And as we were starting, what I was hearing was, well, this is how we should do it, but we can't afford that. So what else? And I said, stop. Don't assume we can get whatever we need. If after we know what we should do to make it the best, then we can cut down then. But don't start off lower or cutting. Imagine you have every resource you need, and how should we do it? And then we'll work back from that. It's a mindset for your team, not only yourself. I don't know that I would ever been able to do what I was able to do if we said, well, we're just a small little group and we can only do this and that. We can do anything. Now, how do we get there? What is the best product we can create with what we need? And I think that among all the things, one single piece of advice is, as you're new to the field, whether you're creating something new, start by planning that you have every access to whatever you need to do it the best way.
That, by the way, is a great way to think about writing. Write as much as you need to write, as big as you want to write it, and then worry about paring it down later.
I have a writing coach too, and that's a variation on her. She calls it, I call it this is terrible. She started off, write me a something letter, or letter. I called it a dirty letter, which is to say, just write.
Correct.
And then get it out there.
Correct.
I playwright me, Sam, but it would never on the agenda. And yet.
Well, you're a playwright now, Sam, whether you like it or not.
Well, thank you, though. I love this conversation. We could go on forever.
Sam, this has been absolutely terrific. I can't thank you enough for your time, your wisdom, and your energy. Great energy for everything you've got going on. And I want to wish you much health in your journey as you carry forward. And I thank you for your time tonight on the show.
Well, thank you very much.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.